That's such a fun and upbeat song, and my sermon's a little different. So, so I don't know how to really connect that as an introduction to this. So bear with me. During the summers of my college years, I was a counselor for Holmes Presbyterian Camp and Conference Center in New York. I always drew the lucky stick of being the middle school camp counselor for Night Owl Camp. Just wait.
Do y'all know what that is?
I'm going to tell them.
Because that is funny.
Yeah. This camp was extremely popular since kids would wake up at noon for breakfast and stay up until 3 a.m. doing night activities. Now, one of the night activities was stargazing. It was a fan favorite since our environmental specialist would talk about the constellations that we would be seeing that evening. Sounds great, right? Well, I want to tell you a time of when things did not go according to plan. Now you see, the place where we gazed at the stars were in this open ball field. To get to the ball field, I, my co-counselor, and my crazy, hyped up on sugar hormonal campers had to walk a mile through the dense forest, a forest with moss-covered, uneven rocks, wet leaves, and thick tree roots. We had to carefully walk through this natural obstacle course. But here's the kicker. We had to do it in complete darkness. I remember my hand shaking as I held my tiny flashlight to the ground to make sure I didn't trip. And I also prayed deeply to not run into my arch nemesis, snakes. And then there were the campers. I remember hearing the whispers from the girls, arguing about which boy they wanted to sit next to, particularly a boy named Brian. And I heard my co-counselor sigh, trying to tell the boys, you can't make mud balls to throw at the girls. But then we made it. With a sigh of relief, we all sat down in silence and looked up, excited to be in awe of all the stars. And you know what we saw? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The sky was filled with clouds, blocking all reminiscence of stars. And then I heard it. The campers began to complain and complain and complain. But what do you think the campers were complaining about? That there were no stars? That they were not sitting next to Brian? That they couldn't throw their perfectly formed mud ball? Or that they had to walk a whole mile in complete darkness for nothing? For me, I doubted miserably that the complaining would never stop. Now, campers and counselors are not the only people who have ever taken a trek. We find this in the main character of this passage, who is named Abram. When Abram first met God, God called Abram to leave the only home he had ever known, a land called Haran, God promised Abram that he would be the father of a great nation. This made Abram faithfully listen and follow God's every instruction. Abram moved his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all of his livestock, servants, and tents, which were many. He made them trek through the brutally hot desert to the land of Canaan. He made them all climb up the rocky hill country east of Bethel, and then descend down towards the mysterious land of Negeb. During all this traveling, God promised Abram 3 times, yes, 3 times, that he would have an offspring that would make a great nation. Each time, Abram continued to show his faithfulness through silently making an altar for God. Now, the 3rd time God promised Abram, God described Abram's great nation in a specific, and I would say unique and odd way. God said to Abram, "I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted." I thought, honestly, the dust of the earth? God could describe Abram's offspring in any way, and he picked dirt, or I would say dust. How would you respond to that? By your laughing, I would think that might be the case. Well, Abram found this troubling, but why? Perhaps he was thinking, well, dust is constantly on the move with the slightest breeze. It is so unstable. Why would God provide me with an unstable nation? Or even worse, what if God's promise is unstable? Does that mean it will never happen? Doubt began to seep into Abram's mind. Now, if you may, I invite you to close your eyes once again, and I want you to imagine with me that you are Abram. You are in the King's Valley after being at war. You have some cuts and bruises that have been mended with bandages and ointments by your servants. It is pitch black, and you are huddled in your tent, waiting for sleep. You hear the servant girls whispering about which boys they wanted to work with the next day. And you hear a good old friendly snake slithering by. Sleep has finally begun as your mind spins about the dust-filled offspring. And then a vision appears. You are outside of your tent in the presence of our awesome God. What would you say? What would you do? You may open your eyes. Now, Abram was this supposed solemn, faithful, and great listener to God. He was in the past. You would think he would be cool as a cucumber in front of God, right? Well, personally, I would say he was more like a hot potato. With his dust-clouded mind continuously being filled with doubt, he began to complain to God. Abram doubted that God's promise would actually happen. the promise of an offspring, the promise of a child from his own seed. Abram was bold enough to say that God had unfulfilled his promise. Abram was done waiting. At this moment, I'm going to let Abram stew in doubt for a little while. And I'm going to turn to us. Yes, us. Just like Abram, we are only human. And just like Abram, we have doubted time and time again. Let us take a moment and think. What have you been doubting recently? It could be small things, like getting all A's on your finals, or receiving your diploma without tripping across the stage, or singing with the circle of friends trying to reach that high note. Or it could be big things, like waiting for lab results after finding a mass, or finding closure after selling the house of a passed-on relative, or in that 5 minutes of waiting for the results of the pregnancy test, or coming out to your friends and family after years of hiding who you truly are. Think about this for a moment. What are some of your small doubts? What are some of your big ones? How do we take them to God? And now, once again, let us return to Abram, who is loudly complaining all his doubts to the clouds of the heavens. What do you think God did? Did God turn his back to Abram? Did God scold Abram like a child? No. God did something unexpected. God listened to Abram. He listened and reassured Abram again. God told him that he was going to have an heir from his own seed. Abram was to have his own child, a child that would form a great nation, and he would finally be the father of that great nation. God not only listened, God revealed himself as a keeper of promises in unexpected ways. God revealed a multitude of stars that reach the highest of heavens. A multitude of stars that are stable landmarks in a place of wandering, showing God's stability for a growing nation. A multitude of stars that shows God as creator of heaven and earth, and of humanity who is created in his image. A multitude of stars that are impossible to count. A multitude of stars of soon-to-be descendants. Descendants that include us. God's listening, God's unexpectedness caused Abram's dust-filled mind to be cleaned out and become twinkling with hope, like the stars in the sky. His vocal doubts turned to silence, a silence of faithfulness, a silence that soon brought Ishmael and the beloved child named Laughter, Isaac. But what about us? What about the doubt that clouds our minds and covers the reminiscence of God's stars? Does God really listen to us? Does God really reveal himself to us in unexpected ways? To answer these questions, I look to you. I look at this Calvin community, our community that is one of the countless stars in Abram's vision. Just take a look. As we raise our voices of doubt, we are consoled by our prayer ministers. Our prayer ministers who welcome us with open arms of comfort at the end of each worship service and during our healing communions. Our prayer ministers who not only listen intently and calms us with healing words, but leave room for our listening God to be ever present. Just take a look. God reveals himself unexpectedly as a promiser of hope, a promise that endured during David English's endless treatments of chemo and radiation, a promise that endures after every clear scan and good news after the many doctor's appointments, a promise that is shown through David himself to us. Again, God listens to us when we are in doubt. Last week, Rachel spoke of our shared struggles with the loss of our loved ones, the questions of where we are and how will we survive this fill our dust-filled minds. We might say in our doubts, God, I can't do this again. God, I can't do this alone. We are looking for twinkling multitudes of stars, and yet God listens. God reveals his promise of being always with us. Perhaps this time it is through the song about rain on a tin roof. God listens to our doubts. Today, tomorrow, this week, and forever, be honest like Abram. Shout your doubts to God. God can take it. God will always listen. God will reveal himself and calm your doubts in unexpected ways. And these unexpected ways are endless. It could be from the people you meet, the tune of a song, a multitude of stars, or from the words of a doubting camper who said, "Oh, look, that cloud looks like a cross." Amen? Amen.